Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Groover. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Mefford.
And I am Kathy Groover, and we are so excited to build on a little bit one of our other episodes where we talked about the sacred feminine. So today, for the sake of being fair, we are, we can't.
We're an equal opportunity podcast.
Equal opportunity podcast. We're going to talk about the sacred masculine. And what's interesting is, of course, there's no accidents in the world, right? If you listen to the sacred feminine episode, we had mentioned a book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or at some point we talked about that book. And I knew I had it someplace. And when we got off the recording that day, I turned around and what was behind me on the shelf. So
yeah, right there.
Had the book. So we don't hear much about the sacred masculine. We hear about toxic masculinity and, white male privilege, but we don't talk about the sacred masculine. And I'm just personally in my life with male friends that I have or male clients that I have, I'm hearing more about the sacred masculine and men's empowerment groups that are forming, not with a Christian bent necessarily, but with this sort of spiritual empowerment bent. So I thought it would be interesting to have just a chat about that today and tap into Jason's sacredness.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of a funny topic, and I think, again, both the feminine and masculine, I think we could talk about for a long time, and we may end up talking about this in future episodes as well, because I know, for you, Kathy, your relationships, the ones that you've had before have been a certain way. The ones I've had before have been a certain way. And now we're both in relationships where we're blossoming more into the sacred masculine, sacred feminine, and we're starting to understand a little bit, I think, of what's there. But it's so vast. It's such an abyss. And I'm still trying to figure it out and learn it, because, well, anyway, we'll get more into that too. And I think, you bring up the men's empowerment group too. I mean, because one of the other podcasts I have is Walking a Spiritual Path with another man, Brad, because we're both trying to figure it out. And there's not a lot of people talking about the men's side of it.
Yeah.
And I'll just throw something out here because, again, it's maybe it's just my perception, but I know we've gone through 500 plus years of very masculine dominated, in fact, feminine subjective kind of energy, religions, politics, everything, right? And so I understand men have been assholes on this planet for at least the last 500 years, okay? And it's more than that, right? But what's interesting is now, again, as we've entered into the age of Aquarius and more feminine energy and how that balance is kind of changing, I think, when you look at it kind of from a spiritual bent, if you will, a lot of women are waking up sooner than it seems like men are, which again is not surprising. Women are more tapped into their intuitiveness than men are by nature. That's just part of the duality in this life. But I think, as that's kind of grown, it feels like from the male perspective that it's a lot of like girls clubs hating on men.
Yeah.
and so, again, for somebody like me who's trying to do the masculine energy the right way, it kind of feels like we're getting man hated on. Not that men in general don't deserve a lot of the stuff that's being said. I'm not saying that, and I'm not making an excuse for the assholes, that are doing stuff. But there's a place for both the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, and the two have to be together, just like the yin and yang symbol. That's a sacred symbol, that we have that helps to kind of teach us some of these principles and how that kind of needs to flow back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't have all the answers. I've got on my list to read that book, but it's interesting because he gives 4 kind of archetypes, And I think we talked about archetypes for the sacred feminine as well. And it's interesting because uh, and we talked about archetypes a lot
Yeah.
before, right? And the more I'm learning about this, it's like there's a whole bunch of little Jasons inside. And for what at least I view myself from a 3D consciousness perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily know when each of these different archetypes show up. I'm not as sensitive to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I just kind of do what needs to be done.
Right.
But my partner, holy shit, she can feel exactly what's up. And sometimes she'll turn to me and she's like, "Who just grabbed the mic?" And I'm like, hold it just a minute. Let me stop. Let me think about
Let me
it.
check.
Right? Because something will come up and because there is, I mean, king, warrior, magician, lover, there's a part of me, I'm a king.
Yeah.
There's a part of me who's the warrior and I'm fierce. And you cross me, you do something, I'll fucking cut your head off.
Yep.
Sort of a thing. The magician part that I don't really talk too much about people, and I'm learning more about the lover side of it as well, of actually like truly being a lover with the right energy.
Yeah.
Because that's totally different, right? You can have sex, but it's different depending on the energy that you're bringing to that particular act,
Yep.
right? And it's all subtleties. And so for me, I'm still kind of working through and understanding some of these subtleties, like, oh shit, I didn't realize that. Okay, what just happened here?
Yeah.
Right? I didn't realize that happened. What is it? Let me kind of do some introspection, and figure out, because there's certain times when each of these need to show up,
Yep.
right? And some of them we are better at than others, but we have to develop and kind of balance all of them.
Yeah. Well, and it's so often easier to see somebody else switch ego states than it is for us to see ourselves switch ego states. And I
Oh
did a
yeah, because
workshop.
we're not conscious of it. It's like
Yeah.
just subconscious is taking over, and we're like, what?
Well, we suddenly are just wearing that, it's like the cloak is thrown over us and we're just suddenly wearing that state, whereas others can go, whoa, that was a change. I just did a workshop in Florida, and I started the workshop by talking about the different ego state stuff, and we picked some. And I was trying to explain, because I've been doing this for so long, I know typically when I'm starting to be overwhelmed by one. And I was explaining to them how much easier it is to notice that in other people first. And then as you see it coming over you get to make that choice. You get to choose who you're going to be in that moment. But it takes practice, like anything. It's interesting we're talking about, you said that, women tend to like discover this stuff before men. There was a great article this morning in, I think it was on Apple News, but I was actually able to read it, about how so many people are turning away from organized religion. And whereas before it was young men who were kind of bucking it, now it's women. Their churches are having trouble attracting women because of this purity consciousness and all this stuff where they're basically beating down the women in these churches. And they said this is so horrible because it's the women that keep the church going, it's the women that do the bake sales, it's the women that do the fundraising, it's the women that do the events, and they're really struggling. And whereas years and years ago, and I found this hard to believe, 90% of people said they were Christian. Now it's like less than 60% are identifying as Christian. And it's like, well, first of all, 90 that seemed weird to me, but
yes, it seems like a lot, but anyway,
seems like because we've got such a Jewish population and other religions. But anyway, it was fascinating to read this article this morning and go, yeah, the women were told, you better get married quickly because sex is this evil thing and men are completely insatiable and you've got to satisfy that. You need to have sex with him whenever he asks because it's your fault if he starts looking at porn. You need to not dress that way because men are just, these animals that can't hold themselves back. So everything was blamed on the women in a lot of these cultures, which unfortunately raised the men not to be responsible for anything. So there was just this dichotomy and so much organized religion that kind of set us up to fail. And we're starting to see that shift where, like I said, there's more men's groups about empowerment and getting in touch with your feelings and evolution and mindfulness. And I'm so excited to see it because I've been, I was raised in the Catholic Church where it wasn't really drilled into my head, the whole purity thing, obviously. So
Oh,
somewhere along there,
you're pure as the white snow,
oh,
right?
that's, well, pure is what my name means. And we've got the whole Snow White thing. But before that, the purity thing didn't stick. So either they didn't tell me or I went la 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 la. I missed that day.
Yeah, you couldn't hear that while the nuns were slapping your hands, right? It was that was making too much noise. You couldn't hear what else they were
It
talking
was
about.
my chatter of he's really cute.
Yeah.
He's cute. He's really cute. Oh, purity. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're starting to see and feel a shift. And we have to talk about the elephant in the room, literally, which is Kamala Harris is running for president. And that was a huge, the second that was announced, I could feel this shift of the energy in this country. There's a new excitement, there's a new vibration in the air. And I think people are starting to embrace this idea, which they couldn't back when Hillary was running. I think there's a vast difference between those two characters, for one thing. But there's a lot of Black men coming forward and saying, I have no problem with a Black woman as president. You shouldn't either. Because I think from what I've been reading, a lot of Black men don't want a Black woman in charge. It's not a race thing, it's a gender thing. And so we're trying to see that shift as that moves across the country, of other races embracing this idea of powerful feminine. It's a really interesting shift. It's going to be fun to see how this all unfolds and what it leads to.
Well, yeah, and I think, with this for both the sacred feminine and the masculine, right, it's sometimes I think we feel, like that as the feminine, the powerful feminine is kind of coming out more. I think there's a misconception that means that the masculine has to take a back seat.
Right.
But no, it's about both powerful feminine and powerful masculine working together. Right. And I think that's again what I'm still trying to work through in this new relationship. And you may be as well, of, well, how does that look like? How are we both powerful in our own ways, right? Without feeling like we have to subjugate the other person for us to have our power, right? Because that's a common belief that's false, right? That we have, is that, one has to be strong and one has to be weak in order to make it work. And how can two strong people, or how can, two things or two ideas or two whatever, because we're so used to dualism.
Yeah.
How can both coexist in a unity consciousness way, right? When we've been taught dualism our whole time. I win, you lose, right? You look at almost everything in society, sports, everything else, right? There's a winner, there's a loser. That's just how we're built, because that's dualism.
Yeah.
But as we're moving more into the divine or sacred, we have to kind of throw out some of the dualism and start figuring out, how do we do this from a unity standpoint? And some of it does mean, one partner may, certain things are kind of in their bailiwick that they just do, right? And it's not a gender specific thing. It's just what works for that couple, right? In a way. So like for me, it's like, I don't cook. I don't cook. And some people might sit there and say, well, that's kind of a male chauvinist thing, right? The woman's got to cook. Well, no, my partner loves to cook. She loves to cook gourmet. This is, actually being in a relationship with me allows her to actually let that side of her out, where she wouldn't do that if she was just cooking for herself.
100%.
Understand that, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I wash the dishes. I do the laundry. I clean most of the house, but I still do man work outside. No, our house is not tremendously clean. Okay.
So
because
you don't do it well.
we're both very busy,
Yeah.
right? But we're not living in hoarders or anything like that,
Yeah,
right?
no, I know.
But so at the same point, it's not, those duties, if you will, are sometimes labeled as gender specific, but they're not.
Well, and that's
Right.
harkening back to the 1950s when the husband worked all day and the wife stayed home and raised the kids. So of
Mhm.
course she was cleaning the house and doing the laundry and making the dinner. I love to cook. I wish I had more time to cook. I would make, other than the child thing, I would make a great 1950s housewife. There have been times where like my last client of the day cancels or it's a weekend and I made lasagna from scratch a couple weeks ago. Like I made the pasta, I rolled it out, I made the sauce from scratch. It was a day-long project, but I had so much fun with that. I loved doing that. I love cooking, I love eating, I love recipes. That's something that I still have this very like typically feminine thing to. The other thing I like to do, give me a glass of wine and an Allen wrench, and I am putting together the fucking IKEA furniture. I am the happiest
because you
cook in
have
the
that side
world.
of you.
It's a recipe, but it's like I'm so give me a drill or like I love doing stuff like that. I love building things. I love putting things together. I remember disassembling the TV because the volume thing wasn't working, and I found a YouTube video
Figure it out.
telling me how to do it, and I just took the TV apart. And I'm like, it doesn't work anyway. So if I break it, I got to buy a new TV. If I don't fix it, I got to buy a new TV. So what the fuck? And I fixed the TV.
Yep.
And I put a thing on Facebook saying, I guess it's time for me to fix the TV. And there was a glass of wine sitting there and the back of the TV was off. And one of my smart ass male friends went, did you try plugging it in? I was like, double F you. It's like that was typical response, right? What's the girl doing taking the TV apart? And I think part of that is because I was raised by my dad, who, and as an only child, who instilled in me, you can do anything a boy can do, and probably better in a lot of cases. Now, that has gotten me in trouble because there's been so many times in my life I have not allowed the softening to be there. I have not allowed the vulnerability or the ask for help thing. And it's taken me a long time with Eric. We've now been together almost 5 years to really just soften at times. I was just on my way back from Florida from this talk, and a woman went to put her bag. I was sitting already. Woman went to put her bag up, and the guy who was sitting on the aisle, who had gotten up so she could get in, said, "Do you need help with that?" And I thought, what a lovely offering. And she looks at him and says, "I packed it. If I can pack it, I can lift it." And I was like, oh, it just seemed so defensive and so harsh. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say no, thank you. She reacted to that as if her strength was threatened. And it was just and I remember being that person, but it was just such an interesting interaction because it completely negated the guy's offer. It made her kind of look like an asshole. I know where that all comes from, but it was just fascinating to watch. She was not allowing her feminine to accept his masculine. And I think that's part of it too. It is that yin yang, we're connected. And the more we tap into our sacredness, the more we allow the other to tap into that sacredness. And it takes a lot of trust and a lot of vulnerability. And I think we're heading that way. But there's been a lot of hurt that has to be undone for that to happen.
Well, yeah, because both sides have to be willing to receive.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, for a man to truly, be in his divine masculine, there has to be a feminine to serve, if you will, right? And, for the feminine to really come out, there has to be someone to serve. Or, what I've found too is that I guess when I am in my probably more the king and warrior kind of phase, so that my partner feels protected, feels safe, right? And again, I mean, it's not because we don't live like this anymore, but it's sometimes easier to analogize back to like the old days, medieval time, or some ancient kind of time, right? Is that, when the man, would go out to hunt or to protect the tribe, that allowed the women then to, cook the meals and take care of the babies and do the other stuff, right? Because because they didn't have to worry about protecting themselves. They were allowed to step more into their feminine side.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes the men had to go off to war. And guess what happened? The women had to pick up a sword. And while they're out, taking care of the field and having babies, they had to have the sword and ready in case somebody came to attack them. So that was a harder time, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think that's a lot of times, what we kind of see now analogized is the women who haven't had true masculine energy to support them. They're
Yeah.
still going around feeling like they have a sword. Like the
Yeah.
lady on the plane, it's like, fuck you, I got a sword. You get back. You get back. I can do
Right.
this. I can do this, right? And it's like, well, you can do it, but can you allow somebody else to serve?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think in our personal relationships, it's like that's an experience on an airplane with strangers, but that happens in people's personal relationships every fucking day,
Absolutely.
right? And we don't even realize, so from the male perspective, it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to offer anymore. Right. I mean, I even went from, there's this awkward time where it's like, do I hold the door open for a woman that's a stranger, or is she going to feel like I'm,
I know.
I
It's
just
flipped to
do
the
it.
opposite
But I
extreme.
do it for men and women, right?
100%.
Just to be courteous. But whenever there's that kind of nagging thing in the back of your head, it's like, well, do I fully show up in my masculine, or is that going to not be appreciated?
Yeah. Or is it going to be misinterpreted as you're trying to pick me up? Or I
Yep.
mean, it's so hard in this society. I don't know how anybody under 35 has sex because they're so walking on eggshells around the other gender, which I totally understand because we had the Me Too movement, which was amazing because it exposed so much of the toxic masculinity. But on the other hand, the men who weren't in that category kind of got fucked because now they're afraid to talk to anybody. I look at people of Eric's generation and they're so like everything is so permissive, like having to ask for permission for everything, which on one hand I understand because rape is bad, but on the other hand it's like, oh my god, like the idea of being grabbed and kissed, like we don't have that anymore. It's like, may I kiss you now? It's like, which
Well,
it's like,
no, it is, and I'll tell you, it's real life for me, right?
yeah.
Because same thing, I never wanted to be seen as a misogynist pig,
Yeah.
right? And but because of that, I kind of peeled back all of that eroticism and sex kind of stuff of not looking at another woman
Hmm.
lustfully, even the person that I'm in a relationship with, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, I don't want to do anything that she doesn't want to do, right? But then from the female side, it's like, what the fuck? You don't find me attractive? You're not grabbing me and hugging me and kissing me? And it's like, well, I thought grabbing, hugging, and kissing was not a good thing
Right.
anymore, right? I mean, because we get confused.
I know. Oh, you poor men. Well, so years ago, this was probably 12 years ago, next to my office was this big furniture store, and they tore the furniture store down. They put up a Bevmo, which I love because I can gaze at wine from my window. And there were tons of construction guys there. And there was one day, it was clearly the guy in charge. Nice clothes, clipboard. I knew he was in charge. And as I walked by, I said, "Hey, how's it going? I see you guys out here every day." And he goes, "Oh, is that your office? I'm so sorry. The noise must be driving you crazy." And I said, "Oh, it's not too bad." He said, any problems with anything here?" And I said, "To be really honest, I'm a little upset about your workers." And he goes, "What? Tell me." And I said, "Look, I walk by here 3 or 4 times a day. I've not gotten one whistle. There's not been one whoop. There's no hey lady." I said, "I'm really starting to feel bad about myself." And he started laughing and he goes, "I'll take care of it," and pretends to write something down. So later that afternoon, I go back out to my car and I hear, "Woo, lady, woo," and he starts whistling. And the men on the site are like, "Oh my God," because here's the guy in charge. And I went, and I was just in like that. I know the whole thing was a joke. And I was never bothered by the whoops on the street. It's like, if that's the worst thing that happens to me in my life, I'm, to me, it was this sort of like, I looked good appreciation thing. You don't get that anymore. And as an older woman, I'm like, is my ass not as good as it was because no one's saying, "Hey, lady, nice ass." There was something about an ego thing for me that felt kind of disappointed that stopped. And I know
Yeah.
to other women, it's so offensive. And I'm like, so someone whoops out of a car. Who gives a shit? I mean, it's like that to me is not abuse. But it was just so funny. He just thought that was the funniest thing. And I loved that he was able to tap into that healthy masculine and joke with me about that.
Right.
I just loved that. That was such a beautiful exchange.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's, like I said, we can keep talking about this for a long time, and we're probably gonna, I think it probably is a good idea for us to maybe keep touching on this, because I think, you and I, from our experiences too, we're experiencing something different. And if people aren't already experiencing something different, they're probably going to be, right? Or, maybe people that, I saw I saw this cartoon, right? And it was a caterpillar and a butterfly sitting at a table. And the caterpillar goes, "You've changed." And the butterfly says, "You were supposed to."
Oh, that's great.
But, again, as all of us are changing in our relationships too, right? Is just like it's a process along the way.
Yeah.
And so you can't have, a woman stepping more into her feminine without the man stepping more into his masculine as well,
Yeah.
and figuring out and learning how to navigate, right, what that's going to look like for your relationship.
Yeah.
Because like I said, my relationship looks different than yours. Some things are the same, some things are different, but that's because there's different people in each relationship.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of learn, what each of those things are. And the same thing, when you look at these archetypes, is, I'm a very strong warrior,
Hmm.
right? And because of that, I probably offset kind of the Amazonian warrior kind of feminine side, so that my partner doesn't have to fill that.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe I'm a weaker warrior. And so maybe that's an area where she kind of protects us as a couple more, right? There's no right or wrong. It's just trying to navigate and allow more of that unity consciousness, get away from
Yeah.
this dualism of winning and losing, and figuring out, how each of us can come into our masculine or feminine, and both, because again, we're both, all of us. Gender does not mean you don't have masculine and feminine energy. We do.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is not about cisgender heterosexual relationships. This is, we all have aspects of this in ourselves, no matter how that expresses. I want to emphasize that, to not exclude anybody, because this is
No.
inclusive of all people, and it is a matter of tapping into that. So yeah, and when at our wedding, which was as of the time of this recording, like 4 months ago. I've been married for 4 months. It's crazy. My hairdresser, who did my hair and makeup for the big day, after Eric and I's dance, which I choreographed, it was a beautiful waltz. We did a couple lifts. There was a little joke halfway through. It was perfect for us. She came up to me afterwards and she gave me a big hug and she said, "I have never seen you so in your feminine." She said, "Watching the two of you dance and letting Eric lead and the lifts and this," she said, "I have never seen you so sacred feminine." And that really moved me. And I was like, wow, yeah, because I've never felt safe enough to give over that control. And that's taken me 50 years to do, which is weird because I'm only 35. But I mean, tapping into past life stuff too. But
yes.
Yeah. But it was just so nice to hear that from somebody who's known me for so long, who has watched me change and grow and evolve. And that meant a lot. And I know Eric is stepping into his sacred masculine, and it's been really fun to watch that happen too. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, we could talk about this all day, but we can't. We must go to work. Okay. Well, I am Kathy Groover. I can be reached at kathygruver.coach.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out, have a great week, and just practice with it. Just have a discussion with your partner and see what you can do to start stepping more into your masculine and feminine energies. And with that, we will see you on the next episode. See ya.